Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, Tell Stories in PowerPoint Using Animations. My name is Jay Pugliese, and I am with Empower. And for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce you to Johanna Rehnvall, who will be talking about telling stories in PowerPoint and using animations. So Johanna, I've known Johanna now, and we've done a couple of webinars together. She is the ultimate PowerPoint master expert. But today we're going to be talking about making transitions and elevating your PowerPoint presentations with animations. So ultimately, this conversation will be lasting for 45 minutes. I will be able to manage and review any questions that you guys have in the chat. So at the end of this conversation, we'll be able to address those specific questions that you may have. But without further ado, I will welcome you to this webinar, and I would like to introduce our presenter, Johanna.
Thank you, Jason. Let's get started. I am so excited to get to hang out with you today to talk about my favorite topic, PowerPoint. Who knows how many PowerPoints are created every single day? It could be in the millions, right? All we know for sure is that it's a lot. So exploring how to make some of these PowerPoint decks more efficient by using animations, that could be a good way to spend some 45 minutes on, right? Now, I can't see you, and I don't know where you're calling in from. By the way, I'm in Sacramento, California, but I'm originally from Sweden. Now, if I could see you, I would ask all of you who had any formal PowerPoint training to raise your hands, and I would most likely see few up to no hands in the air. And yet you all work in PowerPoint every single day. So I'm so happy that you're here today to let me share some of my ways that I try to animate my PowerPoints. Now, I'm going to use screenshots from the PC PowerPoint interface in today's session, but the latest versions of Mac and PC, they look pretty much identical, and mostly the two versions work the same way. There are some differences, however, especially when it comes to the selection pane. But if you are on a Mac, you should be able to follow along as the animation effects outcomes are exactly the same. Now, you will get a handout from today's session of all the details that I shared, so you can sit back, relax, and we will dive into the magic world of PowerPoint. Adding animations can take your presentations to the next level. We are going to approach animations from these three angles: the purpose of animations and some animation basics, the animations and transitions toolbox, and finally, we'll take a look at some slide animation samples. Just a quick note, all of the topics and all the effects that I'm showing today are native PowerPoint tools and tricks. In our first part, we're going to talk about the purpose of animations, 6 animation actions, and the 3 PowerPoint motion effect tools. If you're going to present and are going to use slides, adding animations to your slides can support your presentation in different ways. Let's take a look at 3 things that animations can do. Animations can help pace the flow of your presentation. If you have a complex idea that you have to present, using animations can help you make sure that you can slow things down and go through the parts step by step and pace the information that you're presenting. You might take questions midway through or pause and make sure that everyone is with you. Animations can also, when used right, keep your audience focused. We know that when you put a slide behind you in a presentation or on a screen in an online presentation, your audience is going to read everything that you put on the slide. So let me make sure that I'm in the right place here. It can mean, hold on, let me go back here a second. There we go. My animations are out of sequence today. And then you will be able to keep the audience focused on what they are talking about. The third thing is to make sure that you can emphasize the key points. One of the most important things we have when it comes to designing design tools is creating good slides is contrast. So making sure that the main and most important thing on the slide stands out is using contrast. That means that we can use color and size. And animation actually works the same way. It works at contrast in that sense. It's going to help you point out the most important part of your slide. Okay, moving away from that animation sequence and talking about 6 animation actions. What can we do with animations when we are creating presentation decks? So let's take a look at 6 animation actions. You can use animations and transitions on your slides to show content being added or removed. You can move objects in or you can move objects out. You can also show how content change by making objects grow or shrink, or you can merge or split information. You can also show content and how content and objects are connected. And you can show how some content is important by using animations to highlight the objects. So these are 6 animation actions you have available when you're building your slides. So how can we create any of these actions by using animations? Let's talk about PowerPoint tools and the ones that we have available to build those actions. I like to think of the PowerPoint animation tools as 3 different types: slide animations, slide transitions, and slide zooms. The zoom feature allows you to create interactive and dynamic presentations by enabling you to jump to and from a specific slide, section, or portion of your presentation in any order that you choose. And although I do consider it being part of the storytelling tools and PowerPoint, as it requires more structure and thinking, we're going to leave the zooms for now, and we're going to focus on animations and transitions in this presentation today. But let's quickly see where we can find all of these tools in the PowerPoint interface. The Zoom tools can be found on the Insert tab. There are 3 variants of Zoom: Summary, Slide, and Section. But as mentioned, we are going to focus on Transitions, which can be found on the Transitions tab, and Animations, which is on the next to the Transitions in the Animations tab. And these are the tools we can use. So let's move on to our second part here, where we explore these 3 things. We are going to start with animations and then cover transitions, and then finally talk about the toolbox we need to have ready to use these motion tools. First out is animations. Animations take place on the slide and are effects applied to individual elements on a slide, such as text, images, or shapes. Animation commands can make these elements appear, disappear, change, or move in various ways. There are 4 main types of animations. Entrance makes an element appear on the slide. Highlights an element already on the slide. Exit makes an element disappear from the slide. And motion pass moves an element along a predefined path on the slide. You might already be very aware of these animation types, but bear with me for a moment when I go through this, and we will put them to action later on in this presentation. These animations you can find on the Animations tab, and they are divided into these 4 groups when you expand the animation window. You can also see the same animations by using the Add animation on the right side of the tab. Why do you have 2 places for the same thing? Here is where you have to build very important muscle memory. When you add an animation from the menu on the left, which seems like that main menu, you can add 1 animation to your object. If you need to add an additional animation, let's say you want an object to 1, appear, and then 2, move, you have to add the second animation using the Add animation. If you don't do this, by adding the second animation using the animation window on the left will replace the first animation. So your object will now only have the second animation you applied. So if you ever want to add multiple animations, you will, right? If you start building out your animation sequences, you have to use the Add animation feature. You can use the Add animation on the right side of the ribbon for your first animation and just disregard the animation options on the left altogether on that animation tab. Okay, that said, going back to the types of animations, there are hundreds of animations available in PowerPoint, and you only see about 50 in the preview. Under the preview for both of these menus, you'll see more animation effects for these 4 groups. When you ask to see these animations, there are so many for some of these menus that you actually have to scroll down to see all of them. Many of these are pretty unusable, but there might be some specific ones for a complex animation sequence that you are building that you might be able to use. Each of these animation effects also comes with effect options. There are actually two ways of access the effect options: the effect options on the ribbon and the effects options via the animation pane. So before we dive into the effect options, let's point out the animation pane, the place where all the animation magic happens. The animation panes needs to be open for you to see your animation sequences and reorder them, and to access the detailed effect options for animations. Okay, so back to effect options. The effect options on the ribbon will give you some quick options, and the effect options in the animation pane will give you some more detailed options. Let's take a wipe animation, for example. A wipe animation is an animation effect you might apply to an arrow. Using the animation effects on the ribbon will give you the quick choice of the direction of the animation. So since this arrow is pointing to the right, a quick choice would be to apply from left direction effect. Using the effect options in the animation pane by right-clicking on the specific animation and then choosing effect options to open the effect options window, we have more choices, such as what should happen after the animation and more detailed timing options. The effect options on the ribbon and the effect options in the animation pane will differ depending on what animation you've selected. The effect options is just one tool to create great animation effects. The other one is the timings. You have three options for timings: start, should the animation start automatically with the previous or after previous animation or transition, or should it be done by click? Duration, how long should the animation effect last, to the tenths of a second? And the delay, should the animation effect have a delayed start? It is the combination of effect options and timings that make your animations help build flow, keep the audience focused, and point out the key points. Animations can quickly become overwhelming. It is like going into a candy store. It's full of just nice pieces of candy. But as with candy, if you eat too many, it will make you feel sick, and too many fancy combinations of ingredients in a candy can also become overwhelming. Focusing on just the easy access animation effects in the drop-down menu, I can definitely pick some of the animation effects that I use more frequently than others. So let's zoom in what I use to come back to over and over again. These are part of my animation toolbox, and we're going to take a look at some of these in action. So let's say that in a meeting, you have to inform your coworkers about continuous improvement. This process has 6 parts to it, and using animations, you can illustrate the 6 parts and show how they are connected. And you can also highlight what the main topic of today's meeting is going to be. I used 8 different animation effects from my toolbox to animate the parts of this model. The background came in using zoom, the slices came in using fly-in, the arrows came in using wipe, and disappeared using fade. The slices changed colors using the fill color, which is an emphasize effect, and the text color changed using the font color effect, and the outlines changed using the line color emphasize effect. The top slice moved out of the model using a motion path. We're going to come back to more examples using the animation samples here, but before we do, we're going to take a look at the second type of motion effects in PowerPoint: transitions. Transitions are effects that occur when you move from one slide to the next. So there are 3 main types of a transition. There's subtles. Those are basic effects that provide a simple transition between slides. Exciting. Those are more visually engaging effects. And dynamic. Those are complex effects that involve multiple elements on the slide. The 3 types of transitions can be found when you expand the transitions sample box on the transition tab. And in reality, most of these exciting transitions, they're just too exciting. Just don't use them at all. And most of the dynamic transitions should most likely be avoided too, and even some of the subtle ones. So what do we have left here? We're down to a more manageable group of transitions to put in our toolbox. Actually, I'm going to take out the none, because I personally think that slide presentations need a transition, and my default would be to use the transition fade, which is a very subtle transition between slides. And even though the wipe and uncover and cover transitions could really have a role when you're building animation sequences using transitions, they are very specific and need some significant thinking. So I'm going to pull those off the list as well for now. So it really comes down to these 3 transitions we could use to create motion effects. Now, what is the difference between a push and a pan? The push transition slides the new slide in from one direction, left, right, up, or down, while pushing the current slide out in the opposite direction. It creates a dynamic and engaging effect, often used to mimic scrolling or to connect slides in a visual way. A pan transition moves the slide content in a specific direction, left, right, up, or down, while smoothly fading the background. This transition is particularly useful for large images or maps that span like multiple slides, and it creates a seamless panning effect across the slides. But the star of the show when it comes to using transitions for motion effects is really morph. So we're going to focus on morph today. What is a morph transition? Morph is a way to move things from one slide to a new location on the new slide. The moving of the objects from one slide to the other is done by applying a morph transitions to the slides. In my view, there are 3 ways to make your objects move using morph. Having objects move on the slide, coming from off the slide, or panning or zooming on the slide. On-slide morph transitions are created by adding objects on the first slide. Then you can duplicate the slide and changing the position of the object to the second slide. Or you can, of course, copy the objects from one slide to the other and paste it on the second slide. When applying the morph transition to the second slide, the transition will move the objects from the first position on slide 1 to the second position on slide 2. If the objects have changed size and colors, those changes will follow as well. An off-slide morph transition means that objects are placed outside of the first slide, and then it's moved onto the slide on the second slide when the morph transition is applied to the second slide. And the third version is the pan and zoom transition, morph transition, which means that you place a large object on the first slide, such as an image, and then on the second slide, you zoom in on the image using the crop tools, and when you apply a morph transition, it is going to look as a zoom, as the slide is, the image is zooming and panning in. Let's take a closer look at a slide sequence using the morph transition. This is from a business story about where you call home. This is our first slide. It has some objects on it already. We have a photo, we have a globe, a text box, some lines in the background. We're now going to move to the second slide. The second slide has a morph transition applied, and the objects from the first slide moved off the slide, or new objects moved onto the slide. Going back. So let's see how we did this. We're going to zoom out a little bit here so we can see. Let's take a look what is on this first slide and what is not on the first slide. On the first slide, you can see the yellow slide there in the middle. You can see all the objects that are on the slide. Outside of the slide, you see the objects that will be morphed onto the next slide. The white map, the San Francisco photo, the text box, the purple sea. And then when we create the second slide, the objects that were outside of the slide on slide 1 has been moved onto the slide on slide 2. And we can see the objects from slide 1 that has been moved off the slide. By rotating the object as you move them off the slide, you can create a movement of them as they are transitioned on or off the slide. Now, this is a transition, and that means that the motion effect takes place between the slide and the movement ends when the transition is over. What if you also want to have some continuous movement on the slide? Can you combine animations and transitions? Absolutely. So let's zoom out again and see what we can do. Let's say we want to add a star on Sacramento. Hint, that's where I'm located. But we want this star, we want this to start after the transition is completed with the timing of after previous. So we're going to add multiple animations here. The first animation is an appear animation so that we can control when the star is going to be visible. The second animation is a spin effect animation. You have to remember to use the add animation when you add the second animation, otherwise I'm going to wipe out the first one that I chose. Then we are going to set the timings and decide when these animations should happen. As we have a spin effect that I chose here, I also want the spin to continue until we move on to the next slide. This is controlled by the detailed effect options of the animation. So we're going to right click on the animation in the animation pane and choose the timing to be set to repeat until end of slide. And now we're all set. So let's see what this will look like. And here it is. We have our Sacramento star coming in, and it is spinning, and it will spin until I move to the next slide. By the way, spinning objects using the emphasize effect spin can be really tricky, as it has to be absolutely even or the animation is going to be off. So here's the trick. Place and align the object you want to spin in a perfect circle, and then group the object and the circle together. I made the circle, like the gray background here, visible, but the circle can be set to have no fill and no outline. If you don't, as you can see, the star on the left, it's going to be moving not in a perfect circle. This could be the same way you can get any object to move in a circle. This triangle is actually set in a circle, but you don't see the circle. It has no fill. Anyhow, that's just a little detail on how to do spin animations. As we've touched on the effect options for animations, let's talk about effect options for morph transitions. There are three effect options for the morph transition. By default, the effect option is set to objects. This means that any object on the slide can be moved, recolored, or resized. If you have added a text box or shape with text, the whole object is going to move with no effect to the text itself. The second effect option is the words option. This means that any changes you made to text from the initial slide to the next slide will automatically rearrange the words themselves. This is a good one to remember if you and to use if you know that your text is going to change from one slide to the other. If you use the first effect option, the objects, and change the text on slide 1 and keep it on as it was on slide 2, the text box is no longer going to morph. It's going to become a fade animation, as PowerPoint now think that they are two different objects. But if you use this morph effect option, words, you can more easily make text changes. The third option is the characters option, which works in a similar way as the words. Not so sure how very useful that is, but the difference is that the letters are going to move. Microsoft refers to this as creating an anagram effect, which could be a great way to trigger the creative use of words on your slide. So that concludes the overview of how we can use morph. Now we're going to move over to the animation toolbox. Besides knowing where to find your animations and transitions and knowing how to apply effect options and timing, etc., what else do you have to have in your animation toolbox to be able to animate your slides? The first critical tool is going to be the selection pane. Let's say we're going to work with this slide and this graphic. I deliberately kept it as lorem ipsum text here. The text isn't important. We are going to tackle this one from an animation and transition standpoint. You need to present this to your audience, but you want to make sure that they are following along and see clearly that these are different phases to this process here. The first step, regardless if you're intending to apply animations or transitions, is to make sure that you have control of your objects in the selection pane. And as I mentioned initially, this is where Mac and PC differs, and the selection pane does not look the same in the Mac interface. The selection pane is available on the Home tab and the Arrange group and all the way to the bottom. The selection pane is going to show you all your objects that you have on your slide. And what the objects are called on the selection pane is also what they will be called on in the animation pane if you add animations to your objects. Let's zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. This is what all the objects on this slide are referred to on the selection pane and subsequently in the animation pane if we were going to try to animate them before renaming them. Working here with an animation sequence will get tricky pretty fast. There are multiple objects called text box 93, and which of these pyramid objects is rectangle 24 or 25 or 26? Going back to the selection pane, again, Home tab, Arrange, we are going to spend some extra seconds to rename our objects to something that makes more sense. And once we've done that, the names that we added in our selection pane is going to show up in our animation pane. And now it makes a lot more sense to build out the animation sequence or make changes to it. it's going to be much easier to readjust or rearrange the animation. So how you name things matter in the selection pane. Try to think ahead, add the most common, the most important denominator first, and any explanations of what that object is later. Okay, let's see what this will look like now when animated. This is a very simple animation. Each level, the part of the pyramid, the text, and the option text box are going to come in by level using the fade entrance animation. All the animations are happening on the same slide, and I control it by click. So for each click, one of these pieces are going to come in, and I can paste my presentation and talk through these different options. Let's see what we can do with the morph transition. So we're going to move over to the transition tab here. This is my slide 1. It has only the base of the pyramid. This is slide 2. The first level comes in. Slide 3, the second level comes in. And slide 4 and 5 and 6 until we finish out the sequence. So how did we do this? Well, first, let's talk about the selection pane. Just as with animations, how you name things in the selection pane matters when you're building morph transitions. With morph, you might also need to dictate to PowerPoint exactly what object you want to move. This is especially important when you might have multiple objects on the same kind, like text box shapes. And this technique is called bang bang. It means that in the selection pane, when you're renaming your objects, you always add 2 exclamation marks before the name. That forces PowerPoint to look exactly for that object on the second slide. Adding bang bang exclamation marks is a quick thing to do to prepare your slides for morphing. If you build a morph structure and the wrong object is moving than what you intended, make sure that you have the same name of the objects on both slides and use that exclamation mark technique. Now, let's see how this morphing sequence that I just showed you was built. We're going to zoom out here. We're going to show a simplified version of using just 2 slides. So here we see slide number 1. It has level 1 on the slide already. The remaining levels are outside of the slide. And then we're going to add slide 2. And on slide 2, we're going to place all the objects on the same slide. We brought in the pyramid parts from the top of the slide and the text from the right of the slide. The remaining levels will move on to slide 2 from slide 1 when we apply that morph transition. So in sum, all animation and transitions starts by taking control of the selection pane before you start adding animations or transitions. So let's move to our second tool in our animation toolbox, and that is the animation painter. The animation painter is a way to quickly copy animation sequences you have created. The animation painter can be found on the right side of the animations tab. This is only available for animations and not transitions. When you have added an animation or multiple animations to one object, select that object and click the animation painter, and then select the object you want to take on these animations. Now, please be aware that if you do this, you will also remove any previous animations to your second object if they had some before, but it's a great way to quickly create multiple objects with the same animation. Okay, on to our final tool in our toolbox, duplicate slides. When you're working on animations and testing things out, keeping an original version of your slide as a first test sequence of the animation that you're trying to build, that can really help you save some time if you mess something up or change your mind on how you want to build out the animation. You have a limited number of undos, and you can quickly use all of them up when testing animations. Making a duplicate of a slide before you start working on animation is a quick way to save some time if you need to restart. Once you're done, you can just remove that duplicate if you don't need it anymore. Trust me, this can save you a lot of time. Okay, that concludes our tour around what I think should be in your animation toolbox: the selection pane, the animation painter, and duplicating slides. Before we move over to some final examples, let's summarize the animation process with this 5-step animation roadmap. Step 1, consider first if you need any animations at all in the first place, and if so, what animation action you might want to visualize. Step 2, create your objects you want to animate, the text boxes, the shapes, and images, etc. Now, step 1 and 2 can be reversed. You might already have a slide with objects, then your step 1 becomes your step 2. Step 3, name all your objects logically in the selection pane. This will save you a lot of time when you start animation. Don't skip this step. 4, add animations or transitions to your objects or to your slides. And step 5, adjust animations and transition effects using the effect options or timings. And just as a reminder, if you're using animations, make sure you add those additional animations using the Add Animation on the Animations tab, and save some time using the Animation Painter. One more last tip before we go over to some samples. If you're working with animations and noticing that your PowerPoint interface is sluggish or slow, close the Animation pane and the Animation tab. There's something in how Microsoft uses computer resources when working on animations. At times it can be super frustrating, but closing the Animation pane and the Animation tab can clear things up and make things more smooth when you're working. Okay, we have covered animations and transitions and some tools in our animation toolbox. Let's move on to the last part of today's presentation. We're going to conclude by looking at some different animated slides. All of these slides that I'm going to show you are from different real presentations. All confidential content and branding have been updated or changed or simplified. The samples will show different combinations of animations and transitions. I have focused for this session to show fairly common slides that you might use or see in your business presentations. They are not crazy advanced with bells and whistles and 50-step animation sequences, but it will still show you how you can use your slides to visualize your presentations. They are examples of common business stories you might need to tell your coworkers, stakeholders, or other audiences. This sample is a sequence of slides needed to show different regions in an organization and how they're working on some different topics depending on regions. So, how did we do this? Let's unveil the curtains, shall we? The Earth is actually not a spinning 3D Earth, but a flat Earth that moves across the slide using a morph transition with a transparent 3D shape over it. It is covered by that slide mask with a round hole in it in the middle, so you only see the Earth parts in the circle. And the other text is then fading in and out, and the line is wiped in. The effect of the Earth spinning is made by moving the map up and down on the slides as I move through the sequence. This is a pretty easy slide and in easy animation. The purpose is to explain what happens between business and children. And the important part of this message is to clearly indicate that this is an ongoing process and that it also goes two ways. The effect options of the arrows and the circle is set to continue moving until the end of the slide. I was using the lines, fade, spin, and zoom animations for this slide. This is a slide that was going to explain a detailed evaluation process originated as a very detailed table. It has been split up into two parts, giving the presenter a chance to first talk about the parts of the process, and then moving on to the details of the timing and the participants for the different parts of the process. Slide 2 in this sequence is a morph transition, and the boxes and arrows were using float in and wipe animations. This new sample here is a sequence showing the building blocks on a slide on continuous development. Originally, it was built as a heavily bulleted slide, and it was recreated to 3 main topics, and the animations are pretty fast by choice to show movement. This sequence is using a combination of morph and wipe. The image is zoomed in on the last slide, and the transition is set to last longer, so the image can move in the background. I sped it up here, but during the time that last slide was on, the transition was going on in the back end, so the image was moving to create movement on that slide. This is a timeline showing a year-long process. It's divided into the first half on one slide and the second half on the second slide. This graphic is actually a slide from the Empower Suite's complementary slide templates library that I just slightly adjusted. And I also added an image background from the Empower image library that you get if you have the Empower add-in to your PowerPoint. So this is the first part. And this is the second part. This is just using a morph transition to move the timeline up, and the image moves together with the timeline. This is another slide from the Empower Slides library, a SWOT slide. It is using a rise up animation, which is different than a float up animation. It has a little pop at the end. It might be too much for a lot of slides, but this slide is a little bit quirky anyway, so it might work if you want to bring in each of these parts one by one and give it a little bit of a movement. Showing websites is tricky on slides. One way of doing it is to scroll through them. So how did we do this? The graphic is from the Empower library. I removed the screen part of the graphic, so there's only the frame left. The screenshot of the website is placed at the bottom underneath the frame, and there are two masks in front of the image, but behind the computer screen. And the screenshot is then animated up with a motion path. You can let the motion path go even slower. I had it pretty fast here to just show you how you could potentially show a website on your screens. This is a process slide that starts out as a text intent slide that turns into a graphic to illustrate the process in more detail. It is using a morph transition, and then the model and lines are coming in using zoom and fade. Okay, one more last example before we conclude today. What do you do when you get a slide like this in your hands and you're 10 minutes away from your presentation? How can you possibly apply some animations to tell this story a little bit better? What I would do is to right-click on the text placeholder and choose Convert to SmartArt, and I'm going to choose the horizontal bullet list. That is going to push my text into these book boxes in the SmartArt. On the SmartArt tab that will open up when you have selected a SmartArt, I'm going to go to the very right side and choose Convert, and I'm going to convert to shapes. That's going to break my SmartArt shapes into real shapes that I can ungroup and edit freely and adjust some spacing and some line spacing. And maybe I can just add some quick animations, using the top row first, and then add in the intense text as a second step, as a more reference after the three main points have been presented, to make sure that the audience is focused on the main parts. I might also decide to just move those text intense boxes off the slide and put those text in the notes. And these are the main parts of the slide. Might apply some color schemes to this to break it up, and maybe just add a more focused animation, like in this case, the zoom animation. So we went from this to this, and it literally takes about 5 minutes to create. So that was my super simple going from a text-intensive slide to a more animated slides, and that concludes the slide samples part. We covered a lot of ground today on how to add animations to take your presentations to the next level. We talked about the purpose of animations and some animation basics, the animations and transitions toolbox, and finally, we'll take a look at some slide animation samples. I will hand it over to Jason for any questions that might have come in and add it into the question interface. So Jason, do we have any questions?
Oh, Johanna, lots of great helpful tips. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, just a couple of questions, and if there are any additional questions, please, by all means, feel free to shoot them into the chat now. Yeah, so you guys will receive a recording of this probably tomorrow. Johanna's contact information, yep, perfect, you have it there, will also be included. But yeah, so it looks as though we got a couple of questions here. One is from Victor. He is looking at, is there anything like too many animations?
Yes, there's absolutely, there's absolutely. So in my little roadmap description, the first step is to really think through, do you need to add an animation? Will it enhance your presentation, your story? If it will make it easier to emphasize a point, or pace the flow of your presentation or highlight something, yes, add an animation. If not, don't. You don't have to have animations on your slide. They should be used deliberately and purposefully. And again, I try to use simple sequences. There's no need to add any of those bells and whistles and craziness to it. That's just going to make the audience busy. So yeah, keep the animations to be focused and on point. And then if not, just leave them out.
Tom, the next question here, Tom says he has tried the morph transition, but then I have to rearrange my slides and everything gets broken. Is there a fix for that?
So I wish there was a fix for that, but it's actually not. And it happens a lot because, again, morph happens from slide 1 to slide 2. And if you change things on slide 1 or you move slide 1 to some other position in your presentation, slide 2 won't have those objects to morph in, and they will be turned automatically into fade animations, which, you know, could still work, but it's not what you intended. There's no way to fix it, but to make sure that you keep things together. One thing to consider, though, that if there are some effects, especially with moving things, that you can build on the slide. So using motion paths can really kind of recreate the effects that you get from morph transitions. It is more time consuming to build, but the great thing is that you have them on the slide. All animations are on the slide. Morph transitions is from slide to slide. So that's something to consider, that if you don't have control of your presentation, maybe you are sending it to your boss or to your coworker, and you don't know if they are going to do last minute, you know, shuffles of slides, avoid the morph and do only animations on the slide. But the answer to the question is that there's no way to, you know, avoid that happening. If the slides are moved around, you will lose that morph effect. So.
Okay. We're almost coming up on time, but I do have one last question from Felix. I do all my presentations virtually. Are there any drawbacks at using animations when presenting online?
So there's a yes and no answer to that question. You never know when you're presenting virtually where your audiences are, you know, accessing your presentation. Are they on a small screen? Are there, you know,
Right.
What internet connections do they have? Your animation might be slow or staggered. You have no control over that. You're in the hands of Zoom or GoToWebinar or Teams, what have you, and the internet connection, of course, of both you and whoever's watching your recording. That said, they might still help you pace a presentation or show a main point. What you can do if you're unsure when you're presenting online is to make sure that you don't do multiple sequences, but just keep it as simple, maybe a fade or maybe a you know, something that is not as intense in the sense like motion paths or things that spin like I showed you here. So thinking about the type of presentations and keeping it simple, letting the animation just, you know, move the pace, it could be something to do. When you're in a room with people, you can do whatever you want, but online presentations, you might have to think about what effects and the speed that they have when you add them to your slides.
Right, great. Always insightful, Johanna. Thank you so much for putting this, all of this together. It's much appreciated. Thank you everybody for attending, and we appreciate your participation. And guys, if you have any questions regarding what you've seen today or PowerPoint questions just in general, Johanna by all means is happy to answer any questions. She runs her own design agency called Presentitude, and yeah, she's amazing. So Johanna, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, you, Jason.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone.
Thanks everyone.